All right. So last week we ended with leaving Sinai, wilderness wandering. Moses died. A lot of things happen. And one of the things that I think is really important for us to see as we're looking at the overall scheme, the overall arc, whatever it is, of redemption throughout the Bible. Usually when you talk about storylines, like just in a book that you're reading, there's sort of the rising action and the falling action. There's all the events that lead up to something, the big event, and then from there, it's just the natural consequences. And throughout the scriptures, there are several of these. Obviously, we've been really focusing that Jesus is the climax. He is the main event, as it were, of the entire biblical story. But sort of, if you take a look at the individual stories throughout the scriptures, there are all sorts of rising actions and falling actions. And I think as we talked about the law a little bit, I would have loved to talk more about the law. But as we talked about the law just a little bit, God told the Israelites, if you follow me, if you're faithful to me, everything's going to go well for you. I mean, physically, spiritually, in every avenue of their life. Their crops would be abundant. Like they would have these sabbatical years where they would do no work at all. And yet they would still be eating on the produce from the last year because God was making the land to prosper for them just so much. And so physically, spiritually, in every way you can think of, God would make them prosper. But God also told them, if you do not follow me, and if you are not faithful to me, then all of these things are going to come upon you. And even though all these bad things happen, I want you to return, and then I'll bless you again. He says it over and over and over again. And so since we looked at the law in that way, just a little bit looked at that, I honestly think the rest of the Old Testament is sort of the falling action from, okay, I told you what my standards are. I told you what I want from you. And here's just the natural consequences of what happens when you follow one way or you don't follow the other way. And so we're starting in Joshua this morning, but before we actually start, does anybody have any thoughts or anything on rising action, falling action, or anything I just said? Okay. Okay, well, we're going to start in Joshua. We touched on it last week just a little bit. If you'll turn over to Joshua 11, please. Joshua 11, and we did this last week, so you already know the answer to this. Overall, if you're looking at the book of Joshua, overall, is Joshua a positive book or a negative book? Up or down? Yeah, positive. I mean, overall, it's a very positive book, and it's sort of a breath of fresh air from what we're going to see what comes after it. But in Joshua 11, look with me at verse 15 starting, and let's read to the end of the chapter here. Joshua 11, verse 15 to the end of the chapter. Just as the Lord had commanded Moses, his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. What an amazing statement in verse 15. Verse 16, then Joshua took all that land, the hill country and all the Negev and all the land of Goshen, the lowland, the Arabah, the hill country of Israel and its lowland, from Mount Halak that rises towards Seir, even as far as Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon, at the foot of Mount Hermon. And he captured all their kings and struck them down and put them to death. Joshua waged war a long time with all these kings. There was not a city which made peace with the sons of Israel, except the Hivites living in Gibeon. They took them all in battle. Verse 20, for it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, to meet Israel in battle, in order that he might utterly destroy them, that they might receive no mercy, but that he might destroy them, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Then Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities. There were no Anakim left in the land of the sons of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod some remained. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel according to their divisions by their tribes. Thus Israel had rest from war. So all of the things that we read about God telling them to do in Deuteronomy, it looks like Joshua does it. I mean, it's amazing how, well, I don't want to oversimplify this, but Joshua trusts in God. If you remember from chapter 1, God says, be courageous, be strong, don't fear, do what I tell you to do and follow my law. And God provides the victories over and over and over again. God provides the victories. So it's amazing that Joshua does this. And it's sort of like, even with that first generation that we saw come out of Egypt, they would not respond to God in faith. Joshua does. And just look at all these amazing things that happen for Joshua because of that. We talked about it a little bit last week, and we've talked about it several times, but in Deuteronomy 20, verses 16 through 18, if you were just to describe what was the reason why they're supposed to wipe these people out? I mean, just kind of briefly. Yeah, prevent their negative influence. That's a great way to say it, for sure. And that's exactly why God told them to do that. What's also interesting is in Deuteronomy 20, it says that the first thing they should do is offer peace. The first step was to offer peace to them. And if you noticed when we were just reading this, let's see, where was it? Verse 19, there was not a city which made peace with the sons of Israel except one. And then even then, that was by deceit. And so the first thing they were to do was offer peace. But if they didn't accept the terms of their surrender, then wipe them out. That's what God told them to do. And that's what Joshua did here. And that's a wonderful thing that they did, actually. In Joshua 1 through 12, it's really a record of God's judgment on those nations around them. And I really encourage you just to look up some of the religious practices of the people in Canaan before Israel came in, because it is sickening. I mean, it is just, it'll make your gut turn a little bit. It is absolutely sickening. We talk about Molech a lot because that's one that's very, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, a guttural reaction. Is that the right way to say that? But Molech, I mean, they're burning their children in offering to this false god. And they would play these drums so loud to drown out the screams of the children. I mean, that is just unbelievable. Cannibalism, there's all kinds of evil things. And God said, you're going to be holy. You're going to be set apart. You're not going to do these things. So that's what happens. Okay, any thoughts on Joshua 1 through 12? We're going to notice some things in here, though. Thoughts or anything? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Joshua was one of the 12 spies originally sent in to spy out the land, and one of only two who showed faith in God. And he was really, him and Caleb are the only people who have witnessed this, because that generation has passed away. So those two are the only ones that have witnessed the land. And one of the fascinating things in Joshua 11 was it specifically mentions in verse 22 that as Joshua is wiping these people out, no Anakim were left. So those massive people that made them look like grasshoppers, guess what? God wiped them out. Doesn't matter how big you are, it doesn't matter how strong your cities are, when God's against you, it will fall. And so that's a great thing to bring up, because Joshua knew the impact of not having faith in God. And he saw what happened when the nation didn't do that. Any other thoughts on sort of conquest of the land in Joshua 1 through 12? Okay. So look with me, if you will, at Joshua 2, Joshua chapter 2, because one of the things that we're trying to notice throughout all of the biblical story, all of the things that happen, is that God has always required his people to respond to him in faith. That's always been what God has required. And so in Joshua chapter 2, let's read verses 9 through 14, please. 9 through 14. We're going to read about Rahab, the city of Jericho here before they, it's even hard to say before they destroyed it, because the people didn't destroy it, really. Look at Joshua chapter 2, and let's read verses 9 through 14, please. 9 through 14. And said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitant of the land have melted away before you. For we, this is Rahab talking, we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now, therefore, please swear to me by the Lord, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's household and give me a pledge of truth, and spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. So Rahab here, she demonstrates some serious faith. I meant to switch that earlier, but Rahab demonstrates some serious faith. She harbors these spies, and she says, the Lord your God, he is God. He is the true God. Anybody know or remember what Rahab's, what's the word I'm looking for? What her job was? Let's just say it that way. What her profession was? Yeah, she was a prostitute. And so if you just look at this through earthly eyes, you're thinking, okay, this woman is going to be obliterated with this entire city, because that's an evil thing to do. this prostitute woman. But here she is, and she harbors these spies. She hides them, and she says, I know that your God, he is the God of heaven and earth. And Rahab has some faith here and says, okay, if you deal kindly with me and spare my family, we'll do whatever it is that your God wants us to do. And if you remember in Hebrews chapter 11, we've gone there several times. Whose name is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11, the faith chapter? Rahab. And even more than that, we're going to see that Rahab is in the family line of Jesus. And so we're talking about the overall plan of redemption and God's plan to save, anybody who comes to him. This is someone who's not even an Israelite. But she has faith in God. She demonstrates that faith in God. And it doesn't matter if you're not a perfect person. In fact, if you had previously engaged in things that everybody would say, that's wrong, that's evil. If you turn to God in faith, he will save you and your family if that is what happens. Any thoughts on that? Anything?
Later, being held up as an example to us is important because most of the people who we see who are faithful to God in the Bible are also faithful to their own nation. So maybe it's a little ambiguous. Which is important? Which is more important, being true to God or being true to your own people? And Rahab is an example that demonstrates which it is. It's difficult to go against your own people. None of us would ever want to be anti-American because our brains kind of repel at the idea. But if when you're faced with a choice between your nation and the one true God, you choose the one true God. That's what Rahab did.
Yeah, absolutely. And hold on to that thought too for Ruth, because that's the same thing that's going to show up for Ruth. That's a great thing to point out for sure. Rahab has this faith that first generation out of Egypt did not have. Isn't that an amazing thing? She says, we've heard about the stuff that your God did to the Egyptians. We heard about what he did at the Red Sea. She wasn't even there to see it. And yet the first generation out of Egypt who saw it, they didn't have this kind of faith. Mind-blowing stuff. Somebody else have their... Yes, sir.
I was just thinking, it doesn't really at all excuse what she was doing, but if you think about the way they worship their false gods, she might have been a prostitute in the temple. So when she makes that statement, your God, as opposed to this God that I'm serving, doing what I'm doing, she just recognizes, the superiority of, God, what she's doing, that way.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't know, but it's possible that she could have been a cult temple prostitute in service to another god. And if that's the case, for her to say, your God, he is the God of heaven and earth, would have been just unbelievable. Absolutely huge. Yes, sir.
It's also fascinating to me that every reference that she made, she was calling Jehovah, the God of Israel, by name. And remember, this is not a name that was previously known until just 40 years before, and it was only revealed to the people of Israel. So how does she know his personal name? Maybe the spies told her. We don't know. It's not revealed to us, but it is fascinating to recognize. She does use the phrase "your God" down in verse 11, but most of the time she's identifying him by name.
Yeah, absolutely. And we pointed that out when God was talking to Moses, and he says, I didn't tell your forefathers my name, but I'm telling you. And so I didn't even notice that at all in what Rahab was saying. That's really important. She calls God by his name. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that you brought that up. This is a great example. If you couldn't hear, that's a great example for people in the world, or maybe even people in the room today who think, well, God won't forgive me for the things that I've done, or man, there's just stuff in my past that nobody would forgive me for. Look at Rahab. She's literally a prostitute. Turns to God in faith. She's saved. Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful example. Anything else?
Gospel.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great thing to bring up. Brett just brought up Isaiah 65:1. I permitted myself to be sought by those who did not ask for me. I permitted myself to be found by those who did not seek me. I said, here am I, to a nation which did not call on my name. And specifically there it is talking about, Israel, but just to broaden that out because it's future looking as well. Salvation being brought to the Gentiles. One of the things, I think we talked about this, or maybe I just thought it and then I thought I said it and I didn't. But one of the things about the Bible story, the biblical narratives that we have is it focuses a lot on the nation of Israel, but there's a whole lot of stuff that we don't know that happened to other nations. But we also know that God was reaching out to other nations because here we see Rahab here has this faith, but later on we're going to see God tells Jonah to go to Nineveh, the capital city of Assyria. Like, why would God be worried about what Assyria is doing? That's not his chosen people. Well, there were prophets sent to other places. And if you read through the Kings, there are prophets mentioned all the time. Just like, oh, this man of God, this prophet. We don't have any of their writings. We don't know exactly what their job was, but it was spread out everywhere. Saw a hand. Yes, sir.
I had a friend, unfortunately, was church well person, decided to leave everything I asked. If he was, hey, Mark says to me that I'm stupid, but I'm not an idiot. I'll never forget that. Like he was saying, I'm not going to take part in worship of the Lord, as we all see in church practice. But he knows no other way is better, and no other way is right. Like he understood that this was the way, but he just loved the world. Okay, terrible thing. So with Rahab, maybe there's other verses that say she became faithful and did this in faith. But every time I've read it, she's intelligent to know the real God enough to make a deal for her family. I don't necessarily know that she converted. And you'll see this many times in the world today. You'll see people who recognize they're on the wrong side. That doesn't mean they join the other side. So show me where, do we believe that she became a faithful person?
Yeah, so the first one I would point to is in Hebrews 11. I think that's sort of like the nail in the coffin one first, but then we'll go back to where it actually mentions her back here in Joshua. But in Hebrews 11 and down at verse 31, so, I mean, some people call this the Hall of Fame of Faith. I don't really like that much, but it is what it is. But in Hebrews 11 and looking down at verse 31, it says, by faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. And so, that's one who's an inspired New Testament writer looking back on what happened and said, she has this faith. And if you look at everybody else in this list, I don't think anybody would question, I don't even know the right way to say it, but would question her faithfulness in that way. But when Jericho is destroyed, let's see, in chapter 6, let's see.
As I understand, so you're saying that means, right, not that she was just sparing this one incident because of how she contributed to helping the cause of God, but that you would determine from this that she then became a faithful person.
Yeah, and we'll look at, right. She becomes a proselyte and becomes part of the nation of Israel. And I didn't write that one down, so I'm a little not exactly where it is, but we'll find it here this morning. Let's see. I'm thinking it's in chapter 6, but maybe it's not. Chapter 6 is where Jericho is taken. And we see Rahab's family is spared in verse, let's see, 25. Chapter 6, verse 25. Yeah, here it is. However, Rahab the harlot and her father's household and all she had, Joshua spared. And she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day, at the time of writing, to this day, for she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. And so you don't just live among the nation of Israel and keep doing the things of the nations. You have to be a proselyte and live that way. Yes, sir.
She's actually the father of Boaz, who we read about in the book of Ruth.
Yeah. I mean, you think about Boaz, we're going to get to Ruth too, but when you think about the character of Boaz, Usually that doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so his mom probably played a huge role in that. And furthermore, in Matthew 1, looking at the lineage of Jesus, Tamar, we talked about for quite a while a few weeks ago, and I just forgot her name, Rahab. Tamar and Rahab are both mentioned specifically in Matthew chapter 1. Both of them Gentile women originally, well, not Gentiles, but foreigners who become Israelites and we're faithful to God, and we're part of the promise of Jesus coming. So I think it's really significant. Does that help at all, or okay?
I also think, Rahab's faith is not mere cunning, not really looking at the situation and saying, well, they're going to be the winners, I'm going to get on the winning side, because the only reason she knows that they're going to be the winners is because she has faith in the power of God.
Yeah, that's a great thing.
Out, sit back in the wilderness they came from. It's only by the power of God that they're going to come into the promised land. And Rahab by faith knows that.
Yeah, that's a great thing to point out, because over and over again, she's talking about the Lord and calling him by name too, which is crazy. I didn't notice that at all, but calling him by name. And speaking of God's power being the power that they came into the promised land, we talk about Jericho and how Israel defeats Jericho. I put this in heavy quotation marks because it is just the worst military strategy on the face of the planet that they took to capture Jericho. They march around the city one time for 6 days, and then on the seventh day, they march around it 7 times. These massive walls come tumbling down, then they go in and wipe them out. So there's no part of that is by their own strength. I mean, they're just the worst. Some people have even tried to be like, well, they walked around and it loosened up the soil and it made the walls unstable. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you serious right now? This is the dumbest military strategy on the face of the planet. And so they do this. God gives them the victory and gives Rahab the victory too, which is amazing, and saves her family. Any thoughts on any of that? Yes, you would never walk within the range of their archers. Yeah, for sure. And also in silence for 6 days. Like, it's just so weird. What are we doing? And then the seventh day, but what's also interesting, I'll just mention this and then leave it because I'm getting off a little bit. But if they're doing this for 7 days, one of those days would be a Sabbath, would it not? And yet they're marching. And in the New Testament, we're going to see some people have problems with all kinds of things that they really shouldn't have, because here's the Sabbath and they're marching. Okay, anyway, we'll touch that some other time. So there it is. God just gives them the victory over and over and over again. One of the things I want to mention, I skipped over it because we skipped over what we were talking about, but Joshua chapter 3 and 4, there's this really big event where it's sort of like another Exodus, where they're going to cross the Jordan River at a time when it was overflowing. There's all kinds of water there. And they walk across on dry ground, just like they did with the Red Sea. But this generation, this is sort of their Exodus. We're going into the promised land over on this dry ground. And it was supposed to be a witness for them about the power of God. And if you look at chapter 4, look down at verse 21 with me, please. Chapter 4, we'll look at verse 21 starting. And they were supposed to set up these stones, this witness. I believe it was called Ebenezer. I might be getting that wrong. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But down in verse 21, I love this too, just because I'm trying my hardest to raise my children and think about this. In verse 21, he said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall inform your children, saying, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed. That all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever. Love that. So it's not just us making this sort of unimportant connection, like, oh, this is just like the Red Sea. No, this was intentional. No, this was for this generation, assigned to them that, hey, the God of the Red Sea, the God who destroyed the Egyptians, did all those things, that same God is the same God who's bringing us into the promised land. So when your children ask, you tell them. You tell them how amazing this is. And what's also amazing about that to me is where it says that all the peoples of the earth in chapter 5, right before we meet Rahab, it's all the peoples of the earth will know about the Lord. And then we see an example where somebody who's not an Israelite knows, okay, the Lord is the one who this power comes from. Really powerful stuff. Any thoughts or comments on crossing the Jordan River? Yes, sir.
Take a lot of time to do something that, that ridiculous thing, but well, something that obviously, would be helpful usually, but it should have that God is one that has the power. It's not like people have.
Yeah, absolutely. When you just said that, it made me think of Naaman. Uh, all right, let's go. We're on the same wavelength there. But yeah, it's like that dirty river. I'm not dipping in that thing. But that's what it wasn't. That even isn't what cleansed him. It was God who cleansed him. Yeah, he didn't want to do it. It's a great point. Okay, anything else? Okay, so we talked about chapter 3 and 4. Israel crosses the Jordan on dry ground. Was that the bell, or did I just make that up? Okay, cool. All right. So, man, I am losing it today. I'm having a stroke. No, Israel crosses the Jordan on dry ground. And then something else amazing happens here in chapter 5. So if you look at chapter 5, look with me at verse, at verse 2. Start at verse 2. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, make for yourself flint knives and circumcise again the sons of Israel the second time. So Joshua made himself flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibeath Haraloth. This is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt, who were males, all the men of war, died in the wilderness along the way they came out of Egypt. For all the people who came out were circumcised, but all the people who were born in the wilderness along the way, as they came out of Egypt, had not been circumcised. For the sons of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness until all the nation, that is the men of war who came out of Egypt, perished, because they did not listen to the voice of the Lord, to whom the Lord had sworn that he would not let them see the land which the Lord had sworn to their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Their children, whom he raised up in their place, Joshua circumcised, for they were uncircumcised because they had not circumcised them along the way. Okay, so we had the law revealed to us 40 years ago at this point, and part of the law about circumcision, I mean, even before the law was in place, but when were they supposed to circumcise their male children? The 8th day. And well, we read it, I don't think we read it, but in Numbers, there's like 603,000 men ready for war. And we read in Joshua chapter 5 that, well, we don't know that none of them, but the vast majority of them were not circumcised. I mean, isn't that a huge glaring hole that tells you something about the generation that came up out of Egypt? They should have been circumcised on the 8th day, but they were not. There's something going on here with this generation that came out of Egypt. Their lack of faith has shown time and time and time again. So here's this generation that's going in to conquer the promised land, and God tells them, okay, you circumcise all these people. They're uncircumcised, although they were supposed to be. And so that's what they do. This generation is showing much more faith in God than the previous generation. Do we have any thoughts or anything on that? Okay. Because I think we could go through a lot of things with that. One of the big things we talked about when we talked about circumcision in general was that it wasn't the physical act itself that mattered that much. It was the covenant. It was a sign of the covenant. It was a sign of their faith. And later on, we're going to see time and time and time again where God tells the nation, circumcise your hearts. Now, don't just circumcise your flesh, circumcise your hearts. Like, this is more than just the physical act. But this generation that came out of Egypt wasn't even doing the physical act. So, I mean, there were systematic problems with that generation, and that's why God did not let them go into the promised land. So this generation is making a claim that we are children of the covenant. This is a sign of the covenant. They're saying we're children of the covenant. We're going to do what God says. Okay, any thoughts at all? Okay, so that's one really big thing that happens in Joshua chapter 5. Let's look at another big thing that happens. Let's read verses 10 through 12. We're going to see another failure of the generation that came out of Egypt, and then this generation making plans to change that. Look at verses 10 through 12. While the sons of Israel camped at Gilgal, they observed the Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the month on the desert plains of Jericho. On the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain. The manna ceased on the day after they had eaten some of the produce of the land, so that the sons of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate some of the yield of the land of Canaan during that year. And so here we see that the Passover is another thing that these people celebrate that we don't have a record of them celebrating before. Like the generation that came out of Egypt, I'm trying to think of it now. I don't think we have a record of them celebrating the Passover faithfully and doing the things that they're supposed to do. And so again, it really shows the lack of faith of the generation that came out of Egypt compared to what this generation is trying to do. And we're going to see that's going to be a problem in the future as well. Any thoughts on that? I mean, it's really big deal. They are all circumcised males, celebrate the Passover, and then we're going to see actually the conquest of Jericho. We kind of skipped around in the order, but that's okay. Any thoughts? Okay, well, let's look at probably my favorite part.
Some think that they often seem to come from the parents, right? It kind of seems to diminish a little bit each generation. Sometimes you sort of see, well, our great grandparents were very devout Christians, and then the grandparents kind of went, and then they took the parents went until they grew up, and then they never took the kids, and it just sort of feels like faith is something which is passed from generation to generation, slowly fading away. But this shows that a generation can have more faith. That the rule does happen. So we look around the world and you think, wow, every generation you got this a little bit worse than the one before it. Think about how awful the next generation is going to be, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. And we're going to see in Judges that kind of the way that we usually think about it is exactly what happens. But then later on, we're going to see like with the kings that there were different kings who even came from some of the worst possible kings who were faithful. So yeah, it doesn't have to be, well, they were wicked. So that's why this kid, you see this in the school system all the time, probably, right? School system all the time. Like, well, we had, I remember teaching his father, and let me just tell you, apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? Happens all the time. But it's not always the case. Some of those are sweet little kids, right? Love that. Okay, so let's take a look at probably my favorite part of the book of Joshua that sort of gets overlooked a lot of times. Look at chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. Joshua 5, 13 through 15. It's really important to know this is before they go to Jericho. This is before Jericho has fallen. Okay, so this is before all of this. Look at Joshua 5, verse 13. It came about when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" He said, "No, rather, I indeed come now as captain of the host of the Lord." Whoa, that's a big deal. And so Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, "What is my Lord to say to his servant?" The captain of the Lord's host said to Joshua, "Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Oh, this is a big one. It's so cool. So everybody wants to know, who is this guy, right? It doesn't say an angel. It doesn't even say the angel of the Lord. But what's interesting is this man, who's the captain of the Lord's army, accepts worship. Did you see that? He accepts worship. And he says the ground where you're standing is holy. And when we look at other times in the New Testament, even in the Old Testament, where people who are just servants of the Lord or just angels and angel of the Lord, they don't accept worship and they don't make things holy. But here's the captain of the Lord's army who accepts worship and makes the ground holy. So who is this? Well, I mean, those are some descriptions of God. And so kind of like we've seen before, like the angel of the Lord in the burning bush. And everybody's like, yeah, it was God talking to him out of the burning bush. And it says the angel of the Lord who calls himself Yahweh, who accepts worship, who makes the ground holy. Here we see another example of accepting worship and making the ground holy. And if it's a man, some people call this a Christophany. Maybe you've heard that before, where they say this is pre-incarnate Christ. Maybe it is, but these are descriptions of God. Any thoughts or anything? It's cool. Before they ever go to Jericho, before they march around it, the captain of the Lord's armies. And I love how Joshua says, "Hey, are you for us or are you for our adversaries?" He doesn't say either one. He says, "I'm the captain of the Lord's host. Like, I do whatever God tells me to do." Because, spoiler alert, also, he accepts worship and the ground is holy. Okay, any thoughts at all? All right. Well, Joshua 1 through 12 is very much conquest of the land, and God gives the victories over and over and over again. It is nothing about the nation themselves, nothing about their military might, nothing about any of that that gives them the victories. It is all God. And so if you will look with me at chapter 21, please. Joshua 21. And let's go down to verse 43, please. And if you're not opposed to writing in your Bibles or marking things up, this would be a great one for you to highlight or to put a star by or to put some verse references to, because Joshua 21, we'll start in verse 43 and go to the end. It's really significant when we're talking about the overall story of the Bible. Joshua 21, look at verse 43. So the Lord gave Israel all the land which he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and lived in it. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, according to all that he had sworn to their fathers, and no one of all their enemies stood before them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hand. Not one, look at verse 45, not one of the good promises which the Lord had made in the house of Israel failed. All came to pass. So we see the land is conquered. People are going to be living in the land, and we see it says not one of the good promises that the Lord had made had failed. All of them came to pass. And so now we've seen a second of the big promises to Abraham or Abram that we read in Genesis 12, and then 15, and then I think 18 and 21, all those times that it's repeated to him. So we had the nation promise, which was fulfilled at Mount Sinai when God addressed them as a nation, was fulfilled in Egypt because that's where their numbers increased. But we talked about how God addresses them as a nation at Mount Sinai. And now the land promise has been fulfilled to this nation. And we see Joshua says that pretty explicitly here in verse 45. It's a huge, huge deal. Any thoughts on promise kept? What's that thing that's going around right now? Promises made, promises kept? Yeah, it's happening. And it's been happening. Okay. Take a look over at Joshua 24, please. Joshua 20, actually, we'll just summarize Joshua 23 really quick, because in Joshua 23, Joshua gives the Lord all of the credit, just time and time again. If you just want to scan Joshua 23 with me really quickly, if you look at verse 3, you've seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations because of you. For the Lord your God, he is the one who's been fighting for you. Look at verse 5. The Lord your God, he will thrust them out before you, drive them out before you. You will possess their land, just as the Lord your God promised. Look at verse 9. The Lord has driven out great and strong nations from before you. And as for you, no man has stood before you to this day. One of your men puts to flight 1,000. For the Lord your God is he who fights for you, just as he promised you. Just over and over and over again. Joshua gives God all of the credit for the victories. But in Joshua 24, look with me at verses 31 through 33. Joshua 24, the last few verses of this book. Again, we were talking about at the beginning, Joshua overall is a very pretty positive book. It's pretty positive. And so look with me at verse, let's see, what did I say? Joshua 24, 31, please. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, and had known all the deeds of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Now they buried the bones of Joseph, that's significant, which the sons of Israel brought up from Egypt at Shechem, in the place of ground which Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money, and they became the inheritance of Joseph's sons. Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died, and they buried him at Gibeah. Phinehas, his son, which was given him in the hill country of Ephraim. And so here in these verses, it seems that overall, as a whole, the nation follows the Lord during the days of Joshua, and even the elders that lived past Joshua, the ones who had seen everything that the Lord had done for them. So overall, as a nation, it seems like, again, this is a bright spot, especially in the Old Testament, about the nation of Israel. But I also want us to notice verse 23. Look at verse 23, please. Verse 23. I'd love the whole account in Joshua 24. A lot of us might have it in our houses. You know, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. We see stuff like that. Choose for yourselves today whom you will serve. But look at verse 24. Verse 23. Joshua is telling the people, now therefore put away the foreign gods which are in your midst, and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. So there's still some stuff going on that is not right. So as a nation as a whole, because of their leadership and because God was so good to them, very positive book, but individually there's still some problems here because they had foreign gods in their midst at this day, it seems like. And we can read in other places where even from Egypt, they had taken their foreign gods that they had even in Egypt and taken them with them. And so the problem of sin is still around, even in this overwhelmingly sort of positive book. And there's some other things we'll notice after we talk about something else. But there's some other things in this book where the problem of sin is still alive and well. Even though the Lord is conquering this land, fulfilling his promises, that doesn't negate the problem of sin at all. It's still rearing its ugly head. Yes, sir.
Find throughout the Bible things that we've looked at, things that still have to come in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament. When you look at Jacob escaping from Laban, And remember that Rachel had stolen the household items,
Mhm.
and she was hiding them from Laban. So this was something that, she's still bringing with her, apparently with Jacob's knowledge. I mean, he didn't know about those in particular, but this stuff is going on within his own family.
Mhm.
Then we see this example here. We're gonna see later, even in the days of David and Solomon, how that they do not destroy all the high places.
Mhm.
And this is something that's actually not till the days of Josiah, that these high places are finally destroyed, when it's really too late to
Yeah.
save the people of Judah.
Mhm.
So what I'm getting at is this kind of temptation that the people of Israel, or we say in broader sense, God's people keep within them. That temptation is something that continues on, and make a personal application. How many things do we still have in our lives that are a temptation? We say, well, we're not, that's not taken away from God, but we still keep it in our life.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great thing to bring up. And again, we are going to see that throughout all of it. So that's a great thing to bring up. Any thoughts? Okay, I thought somebody else had, thought I saw a hand. Really quickly though, Joshua and Jesus. So we're trying to point everything to Jesus, how Jesus is the fulfillment of everything. There are some very similar things, very shadowy type things between Joshua and Jesus. One of them is that they have the same name. We're used to the Greek form of Jesus's name, the Jesus, and we say Jesus, and there's nothing wrong with that. So if anybody's ever like, you don't even call it by his right name, they don't know what they're talking about. We'll talk about that another time maybe. But the Hebrew form of Jesus is Yeshua, which is Joshua. It's the same name. And what's fascinating is the name means the Lord is salvation, or the Lord saves, which is amazing when you think about that. That's Jesus's name, that the Lord saves. The Lord is salvation. That's him. I mean, that's him. And here we see there's some similarities here where they're both leaders who followed the Lord's law. They're both deliverers of their people. They both saved the lives of sinners. I mean, you think about Rahab and their family and the Gibeonites. We're going to talk about the Gibeonites a little bit here in a minute. Both were warriors who conquered their enemies. Both are prophets who spoke the words of God. Excuse me. Both are victors who share the inheritance of their people. Both are servants who faithfully follow the will of the Lord, and both are people who led their people into the promised land. So Joshua led the Israelites into the promised land, and Jesus leads us to the promised land right now. We don't have to wait till one day. It's amazing. But even in all of these similarities to Jesus, Joshua was not perfect. Joshua was a great leader, shadow of Jesus, but he wasn't the solution to the problem of sin, as we've been talking about from before the very beginning, the problem of sin. He wasn't the solution. He was just a part of God making that solution. He makes a covenant with the Gibeonites without consulting the Lord. After the Israelites are defeated at Ai, we see, actually look with me at Joshua 7. Joshua 7 really quick. In Joshua chapter 7, this is after the Israelites are defeated at Ai, or maybe you've heard it called Ai, either way is fine. They're defeated. And look at what Joshua says in chapter 7, verse 7. And this, I also don't want to make this seem like this is dissimilar to what we see anybody else doing. But in Joshua 7, verse 7, Joshua said after their defeat, "Alas, O Lord God, why did you ever bring the people over the Jordan, only to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites, to destroy us? If only we had been willing to dwell beyond the Jordan. And then, O Lord, what can I say, since Israel has turned their back before their enemies?" And so, I mean, here we just like, why'd you ever bring us out here? You're just going to let us die here in the land of Canaan? Why'd you even bring us out? And so there's just some things here. And God actually tells him, he's like, look, somebody has transgressed. And that's where we see Achan had kept some things and hid it under his tent, that whole thing. But Joshua's like, why'd you ever bring us out here? Like, what are you doing? And I think we're all pretty similar, but not even Joshua, although as great as he is, he's not the solution to the problem of sin. And we do have to point out that overall in Joshua, he was a great leader, and the elders who ruled after him, who outlived him, who saw everything, were great leaders. And the nation as a whole did very well. Okay, any thoughts or anything on the book of Joshua as a whole? Okay. Well, we'll stop there, and Lord willing, next week we'll get started in the Judges. So remember how bright Joshua was, because Judges is going to be not. Thank you.